The ear goes to the irritant.
The ear goes to the irritant.
If there's something on the track that bothers you, that is the only thing you're going to hear every time. You've got to address it.
Because goes to the irritant. Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing marvelously well. I'm sitting here with the rather wonderful Mr. Carl Crusham. How the devil are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Now, obviously, if people recognize your name, it is because you co-produced with Paul Simon his latest album, Seven Psalms. And you also engineered it, of course. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I'd love to get some detail how you got to that situation. I noticed looking you up online that you actually went to Full Sail University. But where are you from?
I did. My dad was in radio his whole career. So we were like, for anybody who understands WKRP in Cincinnati, we moved everywhere, and my dad would change stations. So I grew up listening to my dad's radio stations, and I never thought to change it. So it would be, as a little kid, I'd be listening to adult contemporary in the 80s, which is pretty funny. And then there'd be a classic rock station, there'd be an oldie station. So I was never a top 40 kid. So I came up like that. I went to Full Sail, and then I just was kind of looking for studios. When I graduated, I was like, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? And I saw the studio online. It said Johnny Cash had worked there. And I thought, well, if he'd worked there, maybe I should go there. I didn't really know what it was. It was a commercial studio that, they call them jingle houses, but it wasn't quite that. But that's where I started. And I came up and started working at the place. And I came in and they said, well, stay for a week and we'll talk to you later and see what we think. The boss came in on Friday and he goes, well, nobody hates you, so you can stay. That was the first thing. And they thought I was dressed up too much because I'd ironed my shirt that morning. I remember that.
People here, when they hear those kinds of stories, is that it's all just about the opportunity. And they forget that you actually have to be really good at something,
I agree. And that's where coming from a music house was so massively important, because we not only did music, we also did voiceover. You spend all day editing voiceovers. It gives you a huge lesson on how to edit on Pro Tools. Massive. Versus, music's pretty easy to edit. Voiceover is extremely difficult when you've got a lot of it and you have to move really fast and keep organized. And that's kind of came back around 20 years later.
You were there 10 years, 99 to 2009. That's putting in your hours, putting in your time. You said you started as an intern and then eventually ended up composing and engineering music for television and radio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you basically, a TV commercial would be 30 seconds long. Radio commercial would be 60 seconds. You'd get these little challenges where they'd say, we want the music to go from 0 to 45 seconds. Then we want a voiceover to kick in for 5 seconds. And then at the 50 mark, we want this kind of big chorus to hit. So you had to figure out math and figure out how to do this with music, which is not necessarily the way anybody would compose a regular song. But so I got pretty good at writing 1-minute pieces that would go places and do things and come right back. Every day was something different. So one day you'd be doing a country song. The next day you'd have a harpist and you'd be recording. The next day be all Western swing or something like that. So it was a bunch of flavors, and there were composers here that I just learned a ton from about music. It was like a big, huge education.
You quote yourself as working as an independent producer from 2005. So were you working full-time there, but also starting to take projects on the side at the same time?
Well, I got picked up by Charlie Sexton. He'd come here to play on a commercial, kind of picked me up because he needed somebody to edit. It was kind of his early, he had Pro Tools rig at his house, and I'd come from editing voiceovers and everything, so I was pretty fast. He kind of took me under his wing, and I became his engineer for a while, and we would do records and either here in town or go places, and he's the one who kind of took me and said, you know how to work the gear, but let me show you how to make a record. And that was like the light switch went on when I met him and everything changed. Yeah, it was kind of like, and the girl can't help it when it goes to Technicolor or something, everything changed. I basically worked with him for, I don't know how many years we worked together, but that was the big shift of, here's how records are made. I've watched him do sessions, and it's so funny because you're a guitar player, you understand this. I would sit there and watch him and I see what he was doing, and then I go, I still don't know how you just did what you just did. I'm watching it. I comprehend guitar, but I still don't understand how you played what you played. He's just such a brilliant player and pretty hilarious guy at the same time.
And a really great singer. Really great singer.
I'd never known that he had an 80s career. I didn't know that when I first met him. I just knew him as like, he's plays with Bob Dylan. And every time he showed up at the studio, had some kind of crazy guitar rig he'd bring in with him.
Wasn't he? He had an album out when he was a teenager.
About 16, yeah.
Yeah, at 16. What was it? Pictures for Pleasure.
He had this great career of record making and coming out and learning. So I was so lucky to kind of pick up on that and learn from him.
There was one of those David Bowie retrospective things a couple of years ago, and he sung Ashes to Ashes, and it was perfect. And Ashes to Ashes is one of my favorite vocals by anybody. So for him to be able to deliver something at close to the level of what David Bowie could do was just unbelievable.
He's got a huge respect for David Bowie. He absolutely loves David Bowie, and they were friends in the 80s and forever.
Oh, wow.
And so he's got the amount of respect for David Bowie is huge in his world.
Yeah, I can't believe how massively talented Charlie Sexton is. Like I said, as successful as he is, I'll reiterate, I'm amazed he's not more successful. Because genuinely, hugely talented. Obviously, everybody watching this, go check him out. Go type in Charlie Sexton and just listen to his music and everything he's worked on. It's phenomenal. So you're working with Charlie. I suppose another milestone would be 2011 when you're engineering Edie Brickell's third solo album, self-titled.
Charlie was the producer on that, and she would do her records between New York and Austin. So sometimes she'd have their guy up in New York do stuff and then come down here and record. And that's when I first met Edie through Charlie. I remember him saying, "You're going to love her. You're going to love her." And I was like, he said it so many times. I was like, "Of course, yeah, great. I'm going to love her. She's going to be amazing." And then when I met her, I was like, "She's more amazing than you could have possibly described." And so I started with her, kind of just doing like Texas sessions on her records. I believe it's the one with the weenie dog on the cover.
Right.
That's the one I worked on.
Weenie dog, yes.
Yeah. If you look at, I don't think it has a title. I think it's just Edie Brickell, and
it's self-titled, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a drawing of the weenie dog. And she would periodically come back to town and do projects and work with Charlie.
Yeah, because it's done as it's a solo record, not the Bohemians. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that heard me when I said her third solo album going, "What do you mean she's done?" No, this was under just her own name. Yeah. And you're right, it's that long stretch wiener dog.
Yeah.
It's like, I suppose that same year there you actually, I didn't know this until we looked you up, but you also are a guitar player and a keyboard player, because you have credits with Ben Harper on Give It Till It's Gone in the same year.
I did a song on that called Will Not Be Broken, came out on that. My best friend at the time was in his band, and when he'd have time off in Austin, he'd come hang out, and we would just kind of mess around in the studio, and we did that. And we did another song that came out on Natalie Maine's only solo record called Vain in Vain. We just did some stuff on that. Yeah, so I'm kind of a guitar player, but I'm kind of a keyboard player, but really master at none of them. But
you've got the producer-engineer's ear, which means that you are not all about virtuosity. You're about playing the right thing at the right time.
At least I'm trying to play the right thing.
I've heard you play. You play the right thing at the right time. That's
okay, good.
So flash forward just a couple more years, you engineered Christopher Cross's Secret Ladder album.
That actually it was a track. I didn't know what that was. There was a whole thing where I went to his house to record with him, and then I came back and there was another record. But the first day I met him, he goes, "Hey, he wanted me to come over and work." And I think he sat down and he talked to me for like an hour and a half before we recorded. And then he goes, "Okay, I want you to hear the track, what I'm going to sing on." And he played it, and it was Arthur's theme. And it was for somebody else's record. The guy who produced that record was doing his own record and had Christopher sing on it. So I was in the middle sitting with Christopher Cross, and he's singing Arthur's theme. And I was like, I can't believe this is happening. Literally no clue what happened to all that. I think I might have recorded some guitar overdubs or something like that.
Well, you've got a credit on the record, so congratulations.
Oh, good. I had no idea. Thank you.
Now, what was the sort of transition with Edie? Because obviously now she's doing an album with the New Bohemians again, the album Rocket, and you're getting full-blown production credit, engineering, mixing, ARP synthesizer, acoustic guitar, baritone guitar, basically all the guitars, Moog bass, piano, Prophet, treatments, wind, all kinds of stuff. So that's quite a big leap that now you're a producer, engineer, mixer, multi-instrumentalist.
I got a phone call from Edie, and she was in town, and she wanted to do another song to add to a solo record. And Charlie was out on tour with Bob Dylan. And so Charlie's like, "Hey, will you go in and do this, cut a track?" And so I helped her with that. And then at the time she'd gotten the Bohemians back together and decided, let's do a project. And she brought me in to kind of produce it. And the Bohemians, so when the Bohemians come together, they record in a certain way that I've never seen, and that is they show up with no songs whatsoever. They walked in the studio with nothing. They set up at Arlen, which has got a nice big room for them, and they jammed for a couple days, and I would just kind of take notes. And then when they felt like they had kind of found a place, they would jam out an idea and they might start on it, where they'd focus on it. The band would start working on the music and Edie would start writing lyrics. So the recordings are what you hear are the first day they wrote it on that whole record. So it went like that the entire time. Yeah, there's nothing written out. And that's how that went. And we just kind of, I think we locked ourselves away for like about 30 days and just did everything and kind of slammed it out like that.
I mean, that's a huge credit. You come in, you're instrumental, literally, playing so many of the parts. And like you said, you got to sit from the ground up, because they all come in with like little ideas that are germinating in their head, and start playing them to each other and jamming and writing songs, completing songs there on the spot. That must be quite inspiring, and it gets all your juices flowing because you get to do so many different jobs.
Oh, yeah. The one thing I will say about that is, people don't really understand that Edie can improvise the same way as if I threw a guitar to you and we started playing and you start playing. She'll improvise a song and her lyrics the same way. She'll start, and what happens is this, and I've never seen it. Somebody might be noodling a little guitar part and she'll look at you and she'll point. And that means keep going. And she's going to start singing. And it works like that in the studio and on stage. And she's always on, always ready to go, and always ready to write. And there's always an idea going in her head. And if she hears a musical idea that inspires her, she'll run with it immediately. And it's extremely impressive. I've never seen anything like it. She's magic like that.
So there you are. You've made another record with Edie, and this time with her original band, and you've come up through the ranks. Now you're producing, you're engineering, you're mixing, you're playing multiple instruments. And of course, that would lead into Hunter and the Dog Star. This time you didn't mix it. Who was the mixer on that?
Chris Shaw.
Oh, right. Great.
Yeah, which is great. Really, when it comes down to it, I'd like to track. I'd really like somebody else to mix, because I love the idea of handing it off and getting something back that has something special to it. I mean, Chris was amazing. He was so much fun to work with. When I've given something to Chad Blake and he gave it back, and I thought, did I record that song? That didn't even sound like anything. And I loved it. I like it being, I think mixes should be like Christmas morning, when you're not sure what you're going to get, and it's amazing. And if you hire the right person, like Chad, for example, it's going to be something special. You know.
I agree with that analogy entirely, because I feel like if we're doing our job, we should be sort of handing it off as much as we could possibly ever do with it. You know, I love this idea, talking to like Joe Ciccarelli, who was like, you know, in the late 70s was doing Frank Zappa records. He was like, there was a pride in the idea that, you know, somebody else would pull up the multi-track, zero it out on the console and be like, wow, what a great drum sound. You know, like everything was like as great as you could make it. So I found that, how do you feel about this? I found that sometimes it was difficult for me to mix something because I'd already recorded it exactly like I wanted to hear it. So I needed somebody else to look at it from the, what do they call it, the 30,000-foot view thing, you know?
Yeah. I just loved other people's work. I never nailed it the way I thought it should be. And I would hear something like Chris's mixes on the record. I'd hear him and go, they're bigger and they're better. They're just better than what I could do. And that's fine. And I don't mind that, because it's like anything in the studio. I'd rather have the best person do the job. It doesn't matter. I don't need to do it. I want it to be a success for everybody. And like having Chris do it was what I wanted. And when they said, can we get Chris? And I said, great. Also, what's funny about Chris is, you know, he's got an amazing discography of mixes. Like he's done it. He's been there. And then I realized he's the bass player on the MTV Rap Unplugged. He's up there playing Mama Said Knock You Out with LL Cool J, and I was like, amazing. That's the guy I want.
When people say to me, you know, oh, you're really busy, you're doing multiple things, I always think to myself, everybody I admire is exactly what you've explained. Music is just kind of a way of life, isn't it? You know, we get up, you know, we can play instruments, write songs, engineer them, produce them, mix them, whatever, arrange them, talk about them, blah, blah, blah. To me, it's just, you know, you're either in music or you're not. There may have been a time maybe where you could just be an engineer. But even then, you know, I think of all of those incredible engineers had so many other outlets as well.
I still try to tell anybody, especially young people, I'm like, you've got to do as much as you possibly can. Can you musical direct for something? Great. Can you just straight engineer? That's great too. Can you play a little bit of guitar and a little bass? Do you understand a little bit of this? Or can you understand editing, dialogue for film. Just get a little bit of everything because it's a tough world. It's not easy, but if you've got a lot of outlets and you can do a little bit of a lot.
And you don't know where your opportunity is going to come from.
I was in here at the studio for years doing, like I said, songs for fast food restaurants. Not exactly the most thrilling artistic endeavor. If I didn't start here, and it wouldn't have gotten to where I went.
So just to flip back, because you may have explained it and maybe I missed it, but I'd love to know. So what was the actual connection with Charlie? He came in to do a commercial? And
yes. Well, Tequila Mockingbird had, we worked with ad agencies, and their philosophy of the owners of the studio, one guy was, he used to be able to sleep at the wheel in the 70s, and another guy came from the ad agency. And their whole idea was, once you sold a commercial to the demo to a client, you would hire local musicians to come in and play on the commercials. They would make money. So when we would do certain commercials, we would call in for like really kind of rock guitar and all this kind of stuff. David Grissom would come in and play on it. For Western swing or something, it was Red Volkart would come in and play. And so Charlie came in, if you needed something kind of interesting and weird and outside, Charlie would come in and he could do that all day long. Atmospheric or strange. I remember he came in with a Dan Electro convertible. Remember those, like kind of like the acoustic ones, prescription experience pedal and the boomerang. But that's how we would do it. So I would meet people through that. So I would meet a lot of the community, the musical community of Austin through there.
Are you still in Austin?
I am. In fact, I'm actually in the building that used to be Tequila Mockingbird. It's now been bought and changed. It's called Vine, and this is my room that I rent out. That's my thing of Gretchen. So that's a because I know you're a guitar player. That's a red sparkled penguin.
Nice.
You're from England. You'll appreciate it. I think everybody will appreciate it. That's if you can see, that organ was Ian McLagan's in the Faces.
Lovely. Oh wow.
Yeah, that's my special piece, and then some other acoustics up there. There's a 12-string Guild, a 12-string Fraulini, Martin Porter Wagner model, some oddball Gibson. It's like called an Iron Mountain or something. And then that is a Guild, a 70s Guild F30. It's got some weird appointments, and that's my high-strung acoustic.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, it's the electric mandolin. I saw that on the How the West Was Won from Led Zeppelin, and John Paul Jones was playing that. And I thought, that sounds amazing. So I got one like his. 12-string octave guitar, kind of like Buddy. You used to see that in Buddy Miller rig rundowns, and fake Mellotron, Prophet, Mini Moog, and there's 70s Park, 70s Marshall 20 watt, and some stuff like that.
That's two Led Zeppelin references in the last 20 seconds. So I'm assuming there's some Zeppelin in your...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you get older and your tastes, progress, and you get to jazz records and you get avant-garde records, but still sometimes I want to hear Jimmy Page and I want to hear Led Zeppelin, and I don't care if people think it's silly. I still will crank it up.
Well, obviously, the Paul Simon gig would have come through the association with Edie. So, I mean, how did that happen? Did Paul come down, see you work various times?
I've met Paul a couple times just here and there, very casual, and I talked to him. And when you talk to Paul for the first time, it's extremely exciting. I'm 45 years old, but I've known Paul for 45 years. So I kind of met him through there. And then what happened was they had planned to get a place somewhere in Texas and to leave Connecticut. And so Edie told me, hey, you're going to work with Paul. And he had never really worked with me. He'd worked with his team for a long time up in New York and Connecticut. So he came down in September of 2020, and that's when we started this. We kind of met, and first day he took me in and he handed me an acoustic, and then he kind of showed me what he was working on. And then we talked for a little while, and I don't know if I asked him or whatever, but he showed me how to play Mrs. Robinson. He goes, here's how it is. But he goes, most people play it wrong. And he showed me the proper way to play it. So I still don't know if he likes it or not, but he got me.
He's always been a real A-list acoustic guitarist. And it's no joke when you're saying about people not being able to play some of that stuff. I mean, the lines were always beautiful. Always beautiful. Growing up as a guitar player, I would always listen to his acoustic stuff. And between him and like a handful of Neil Young things, those were always the stuff that excited me. As you've mentioned earlier, Jimmy Page as well with his acoustic playing. But his picking style is absolutely superb. The fact that he can be a whole arrangement, which really sort of leads us on to Seven Psalms, because it is completely driven from the acoustic guitar and the voice. How was it recorded? Was it recorded in single takes and then comped? Was it done in different pieces? You know, I'm sure you've been asked this question 100 times, and you will continually to be asked it.
It's kind of confusing because Paul did Graceland. He always wrote music first, and then he wrote lyrics. Or the music and the lyrics were kind of coming together at first, but he'd only focus on music. The initial recordings were done in Connecticut, and he brought them to me, and then he started going, I'd like to work on them. And in that way, what he meant was, as he's writing and singing to himself, he might want to go, in this little section, I don't like this phrase here. I want to erase it, and I want to put something new right here. So we would punch into the original recordings. That's how we worked for the first bit. But what's funny about it is there were no lyrics, there were no scratch vocals. It was just guitar music. Six pieces. I can't remember how many it was at the time. And I came in. We started punching. I would have to tonally match what he had done up north to what we were doing in Texas, which is we were working in a log cabin that was built in 1905 with bad power, and it was really noisy because it was a cabin. So I would try to match as he would maybe come up with new parts, or he would change things. And then eventually December, he's like, I want to write a new song. So I got to really cut a track from the top. And that way, what we just did is we just recorded. He would just record. He would just play and record, and we'd comp some things together, and it would take some time. And then we'd put it together. Once we still put it together, you still would work on it forever, tweaking and going, maybe that's not as good as it could be. Let's fix that, or let's do that. Or he'd come back one day going, I've written a melody, and he wouldn't say this, but I know he'd written something, and he'd need more space to fill out the idea. So we'd have to either edit it or replay and kind of concept how it would work.
It sort of reminds me of John Kurlander told us about doing the music for Lord of the Rings, how they had written, obviously, the score, and then they kept editing the film and changing scenes and elongating them or shortening them, and they would have to replay and punch in. But then by this time, they were in a different part of the world, so they'd have to get an orchestra back and try to match stuff.
That's exactly the way it is. But you can imagine when you've got an acoustic guitar and nothing else, you're completely naked and you're doing your best. But even from day to day, forget Connecticut to Texas, when you're talking about day to day, how you feel, how hard you're playing. I remember one day we were cutting, and I kept on noticing we'd record a little bit, listen back, go back and record more. I kept on noticing the sound would change. And I finally realized every time he'd stand up, he'd scoot his chair back a little, about an inch, and then sit back and later come back in. So he's slowly going away from the microphone. And part of what I was trying not to do was be in his face when he's recording. I just wanted to kind of go, let's get the mic set up and let that room be his. And I don't want to get in the way of his vibe. So I wouldn't go in the room a whole lot unless I had to. And finally I realized, okay, this is what's going on. So eventually I would put things behind the furniture so he wouldn't move backwards. But it was extremely difficult some days, just with, the temperature would be different. Guitar would sound different.
What guitar was it?
Power would be crazy. It's the guitar he used, which he calls the magic guitar, is his, let's call it, I think it's a 70 or 71 Gurion SB3. So it's a Brazilian rosewood 3-piece back. He bought it from Gurion, who sold it to him. I think he bought it in 71. And that's the guitar that's on all the solo records. Now, in a cool way, we were doing some overdubs in New York. He did bring out one of the S&G guilds, one of the Simon and Garfunkel era guilds from the 60s that had been changed to a high strung. I told him after that, I was like, this guitar needs to come out on every session. I don't care if we use it or not. I just want to have it in the room so we can have the S&G guitar and the solo year guitar just for vibe, because I thought it was really, really cool.
For the geeks amongst us, which is myself included, of course, what was the miking on the acoustic, and then of course the recording for the vocal?
The miking is a 251 clone. It was an old Sound Deluxe.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful, yeah.
Yeah. It was old Sound Deluxe 251, and it's going through a V76 into a purple MC77. The vocal is a Wonder Audio CM49S, going through a V72, going through 175. Is that what they are? One of those. And the preamps were racked by David Marquette. So they're Marquette Audio racking job. So that's what I took that wherever we went, that went with me.
It's a lot of tubes there.
Yeah. And then we had a couple other things, like we had some DPA mics for stuff, which we going through a Grace for the 130 volts or whatever. And then Wonder Audio PEQ2s were for some other extra stuff.
What was the decision on going to England to record with the choir there?
That was always in the air. The Voce Sate group, he had found somewhere online and heard them and just kind of fell in love with the way they sang. So we knew they were always going to play a part, and they happened to be in Texas. They were on tour. So we went to Houston for a couple of days and recorded them. They were doing gigs at these churches where they would do day shows and then do night shows. And so they were there for a couple of days. So we set up in the church, and Paul worked with them and recorded them. Then we took all that stuff and we did some edits. And then they decided they wanted to record even more at their spot in England. So we set up a Zoom and everything so we could watch them, and they did a bunch of just vocal stuff for us there. And then we sent us the tracks so we could take them and then place them and manipulate them however we wanted. As
far as the arrangements on the record, for Your Forgiveness, what were you using mic-wise? The same selection of microphones that you had there?
For the orchestration?
Yeah, for Bob Sirota stuff. Yeah, on Your Forgiveness.
That was, I want to say, it's a stereo not stereo, I guess it's redundant. C24.
Stereo C12, so yeah, C24.
Yeah.
I knew where you were going.
Yes, I think we did DPAs. We might have done something else. I can't remember. And to be honest, I can't remember what the close mics were off the top of my head.
Do you feel your mic pre-selection going with these more tube basses like V72s and stuff like that really helps? Because are you going straight into a DAW or not? You're not going onto tape on this?
No, it's all. The idea of going onto tape for a project like this gives me nightmares.
I can only imagine, yeah.
I can't even fathom that. So no, it's all straight to a DAW. That was the only vintage piece of gear Paul had in his studio setup were those preamps. And when I used them, I was like, I see why. They're amazing. They were just huge, fat-sounding pre's, and I absolutely love them. That kind of decision was handed to me through his previous engineer who said, this is what he's used. So I said, okay, if that's what he used to, I'll stick to that. I've
got to say, one of the most striking things about this record, of which there's many, is his vocals. Because, as artists get older, the voice tends to crumble a bit. We all know and love these incredible artists, and there's that sort of essence of almost like they're gasping for air. With Paul, I was listening to it with my wife when we were driving a couple of days ago. She's like, he sounds like he's like 36. His voice is, for a man who's in his early 80s now, it's unbelievable how fresh and vibrant his voice sounds. Was that a concern? Were you comping around stuff like that? Or is that just literally how he delivers?
That's how he sings. And when he sings, the one thing I wish everybody could have seen, because it's so great, is when he sings in the studio, he still emotes the same way as you see him on stage. The hands move as he's telling the story. And his ability to sing and tell the story, that's what you're hearing. That's the thing that's been there from the beginning is, number one, he's a great singer.
Oh, yeah.
But he also knows how to sing and tell the story he's trying to tell. You're right. At that age, it could be, you never know what you're going to get. And Paul had hearing loss during the making of this record. Because of that, we had to deal with a lot of, let's call it extra stress for him. And that was a whole variable that we had to really work around. And it took time. It took time to go addressing what it was and figuring out how to work with it. And then once he did, there was just a day once it clicked. And I was like, there he is. And he sang great. And from that point on, it never changed. It was pretty incredible that day. And overall, I got to say, to watch somebody fight Mother Nature.
One of a handful of the greatest songwriters of all time, as we just did our Paul Simon tribute a couple of days ago. I can't remember who said it. I think it was Rolling Stone. Called him the greatest living American songwriter.
He's pretty amazing. It's really funny when you work with him and then you go to do other projects. And it's a constant joke I hear when people go, oh, you work with Paul, now you're working with us. Sorry. And I go, well, it's a little bit different, but it's the same, So
this is Patrick Dillett. Is that how I pronounce his name properly?
Yeah, Pat Dillett.
So what was the process? Was that somebody, did you choose them? Did Paul choose them?
To my knowledge, the recommendation from Paul's son, Adrian Simon, who had done work and somehow had known of his work and said, he's done this. He kind of works in this world. Pat's got a credible history coming up in the 80s. And he'd done a lot of hip hop and a lot of stuff, but then he kind of comes up through the David Byrne camp as well and everywhere in between. So he's got a vast, vocabulary of mixes. And we went up to New York and we met him. And when I met Pat, we realized we had met years earlier here at Tequila Mockingbird when he came to cut strings for David Byrne. But when we met him, he was the missing piece of the production puzzle. It all came together once we met Pat.
I'm looking at his credits, very, very eclectic. I mean, Joe Jackson jumps out to me, David Byrne, St. Vincent, like super eclectic. Yeah. Norah Jones, especially his mix discography is really very, Donald Fagen, Steely Dan. Yeah.
Exactly. And the fact that he understood, Pat's perceptive, he's extremely intelligent and knew what we were going for and knew where it needed to go. And so once we were with him, I was like, okay, fine. This is going to be great. Because I'd worked on it for almost 2 years at that point. So I was in pretty deep in that world. So having his perspective to come and work with us was fantastic.
The first time I heard the record, I really felt like I was listening to something that was conceptually created from the off. It doesn't feel like it's something that's created then mixed. So he must have just fit in beautifully, because you don't get that illusion of like, here's a sheen that's been added by somebody else to try and make it more pop or something like that. It all is very, very cohesive. And I did skip over, and which is really silly, James's Haddad's role, because he played so many unusual instruments. When you're being presented with something, you're not quite sure what it is and where the sound comes from. I mean, that must be quite some fun when it comes to miking. Did you always have a stereo pair of something available just in case?
No, in fact, I stayed away from stereo. I was like, I don't want to, for some reason, I was like, I was not interested in it. I don't know why. I did a little bit. Then after a while, I was like, when you work on a record for 2 years, you can kind of grow and change within the record. And I started changing up the way we were doing things. The majority of the sounds you're hearing are Paul. Jamie has a couple places where it's Jamie Haddad, where it's on a song called Trail of Volcano. You hear Jamie kind of play this bell part. But the majority of the percussion you hear, that's all Paul.
Oh, amazing.
I mean, the majority of everything you hear is Paul. As much as I tried to find a way to get me on the record, I never did. I tried to find a way to snap on it or something, but it never happened. But that's Paul. But the way I recorded that kind of stuff, we had a glockenspiel, we have this beautiful glockenspiel and stuff. I would use very simple things. So it's like DPAs on that, just because I wanted it real clean and real pretty. And the DPAs didn't sound sterile. They sounded really nice and beautiful. So I really liked those. Some Sheps, small diaphragms on stuff. And a lot of times Paul would just play into the 251. He would just grab something and he'd just want to move quick and he'd play it in a piece of percussion or something like that. So there wasn't a whole lot of crazy miking. And I just wanted things to kind of be, this sound is here, this sound is there. I didn't want anything to be here, because he didn't really care about that. He wanted...
Agreed. It would have ruined the intimacy for everything to be super panned and
he wanted things to kind of come and go at levels where you might hear it, you might not, or you might go, what is that? Yeah, the whole time was neat. And I think he described it as on the edge of your hearing.
I love that idea.
Yeah. So it was there'd be times where we'd do this incredible sound and you go, pull it down, keep it going. And all you'd get was this little ting of it or something, the little top end of it. He's like, that's where it should be.
Yes, as you know, we were talking about right at the beginning of the interview, it really is an acoustic vocal record. It's driven entirely by that. And then all of his beautiful additional production is supporting that. And it's one of my favorite records to showcase, I think, for acoustic guitar playing. It's interesting to hear that you were talking about, since Graceland, he's written in this this way of doing the music first and then writing afterwards. But then that led to you having to shorten and lengthen and change pieces as he started writing to pre-existing stuff. Definitely feels like one of the most connected guitar vocal records I've ever heard. I challenge people to go and listen to it because you'll hear the real subtlety in some of his picking and some of the pull-offs and like some of the double stop stuff that he does, which is really quite sophisticated, to be quite frank, for, you know, a folky kind of acoustic guitar player, you know.
Yeah.
And all of those moments are special and seem to really work off the vocal and vice versa. You would never guess that they were written, you know, guitar first, vocal afterwards. You would think that they were a reactive, like the vocal made this guitar part happen, this guitar part made that vocal happen, which I suppose it kind of did, didn't it? Because you were going back in and fixing.
In his mind, it was. It's different for us because we're so used to doing one way. He doesn't think that way. It's a very different experience, and I had to learn that. It was part of my getting to know him, going, just trust him. He's done it. He knows what he's doing. Just follow along and hang on if you can. And, you know, that, you know, you're first getting to know somebody as an engineer, and you've done it too, where you get somebody new in the mix, trying to figure out how do they like to work and do that stuff. And that's where I had to learn. I mean, just showing up with no vocal and trying to understand what was going on, might be going on in the section, and was pretty interesting. Or trying to remember where you were. What song was it, where you were? Because on the record, there's a song called The Lord, which appears 3 different times on the record. So you have to remember where you are when you're editing and all this stuff to kind of...
Did you lay this out as one complete thing? Did you have multiple sessions?
No, it's everything is its own session. And if you looked at it, it is a massive session. The biggest sessions I've ever worked on.
So was it assembled afterwards by Greg Calby? Or did you assemble the final 2 tracks afterwards?
We do the final 2 tracks, but the way they'd have to bleed into each other, that was a constant back and forth to make sure that if there was a tone that bled, that connected it, that it was at the right level of the other song when it came in. So it was a lot of give and take of doing it once, going back, fixing it, tweaking it. The mix took a long time. It took a couple weeks to mix that record.
Was it done on the 2-track, the blending process? Or did you do it? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Or else the sessions would have been maddening.
Yeah, I was picturing in my mind, I was thinking of, like, you know, 60 tracks and then another 60 tracks starting here and this offset, and thinking how it could be done.
The way you have to look at it is, it'd be like 100 tracks. And the way you think of it, for anybody who's ever worked in movies, is the guitars and all the harmonic content of that stuff would be up here. But then all the bells and sounds would be more like sound effects, like a sound design for a session. Because what he would do is, we would take sounds and tune them. If there was a guitar note that he wanted to have a tail to it, he would take a bell, play the bell, and then have me tune it to the note, so it would transfer from the guitar to the bell sound. So to keep myself organized, I'd have bells, but I'd have to put them in the key. So if he goes, oh, I think we need one in A, I could easily grab it and move it. So I always could look on the side. So it would be like, 12 tracks of bells. So I could easily grab it and realize if he goes, what bell is that? I could go, that's an A or A flat or whatever.
That makes sense because of the decay of, you've got the initial transients and everything of a hit of a guitar, but then of course it goes to the fundamental. And what's purer than a bell sound of just, whoa, yeah.
And that's why when you listen to the whole record, all the low end, that's a pump, majority is a pump organ. It might fade in and fade out, or there's tons of stuff that are extensions of guitars or extensions of stuff that's what he wanted to use for reverbs in a way. I mean, there's reverb on the record. What he loved is that we kind of striving for when you do stuff like that is, it's one thing to have the note, it's another thing to hear the beats of the vibrations creating something. And if you got lucky, you got one that was really good. And so you do it until you got one that was good and get excited, and we put it in, and that's how a lot of it. And there's one more bell, which we call the elephant bell. And you hear that on a lot of, this is mine, and it's not as good as his.
Was that literally worn by an elephant?
It's supposedly, I don't know. I mean, his might have, but this was worn by Amazon.com. Where I got that one.
So it would have been around the neck of a very large animal, like an elephant.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's definitely an odd looking bell.
Beautiful.
But that was kind of some of the stuff we would look at and use. And like I said, that's what made the session so big, is for a lot of these instruments, I'd have them all broken up into separate tracks for the keys of the bells, keys of the low-end pro melodeon and stuff like that. So it was a horrendous looking session. It would make me crazy. I'd have to reorganize it every night before we'd finish just to make sure everything was back where it was. So we'd constantly be moving stuff around.
Now, Greg Calby, of course, been mastering his stuff since, I suppose, Hearts and Bones. Then, of course, famously did Graceland. So that was just a given, I presume?
Yeah. Greg, and kind of once it got into Pat's world, whatever, I was like, I trust him, and he and Paul had a good rapport. So to Greg, and I was like, that's fine. I imagine Greg was going to do a great job, and he did.
Any kind of anecdotes? Is there moments on the record that are really special to you that you're able to share?
I mean, there's a lot of moments where I just saw him work that I was extremely impressed and thought, most people don't work like that. And one of them is when the string players came, and Bob Sirota had written the score. And the way we work on that is you set everybody up in the room, set up monitors, and then Paul goes in there and basically breaks it up in sections and wants to hear the first movement you're going to play in the piece. Let's hear it. And they play it with the speakers, and then he might change things. He works. He has no fear of editing and rearranging on the spot and working with Bob and all that stuff. It was amazing to watch him work. It was a long day. We were in New York, a lot of jumping around to make sure we didn't feed anything back to the players and everything. But it was one of those days where I thought, I wish everybody could see him work like this. This was incredible because he's improvising, he's making moves, changing things. As far as I'm concerned, I had was one of the most fun days on the record was doing that. And then there was one time I said, would you mind standing in the shower and playing this instrument because it sounds really good? And he's like, yeah, no problem. At one point, I had him in the shower playing a Gobi Chand just so we get the reverb of the room. The other thing that's kind of funny about it is Paul grew up making records starting in the 50s, and that mentality hasn't changed. And what he's looking for a lot is a great room tone for his vocals. Is where can you sing where the room sounds interesting? And he came up on Elvis records and all that stuff, and Bo Diddley, and so we're always looking for a place that we might find interesting. And we did some singing at Arlen, and he would kind of walk around the room, and he found out that the room he liked was the kind of like their weird, it's not even like an airlock, it's just a hallway, and it's got this great echo, and that's what he was looking for. He goes, okay, this is where I'm going to sing. And it's one of those situations where you had to turn off all the AC in the building, turn off the refrigerator. It was like the worst place you could possibly think of for that, but that's the sound, and that's where we recorded a lot of the vocals. Came out of that space on the record. Yeah, you talk about the 50s. I mean, he's probably had arguably 4, possibly 5 careers, because he's got Tom and Jerry, he's got Simon & Garfunkel, he's got solo up until Graceland. Then Graceland is another whole chapter in his career, and now this is almost like the 5th chapter. It's like nothing he's done before, but makes absolute perfect sense in the trajectory of his career and his life. Yeah, and you know what's funny is it's really, I noticed out of his guitar playing has changed in the past couple of years. And to me, I always said it's like he's created a new language for himself, because it's not it's not the Travis picking. There's maybe 2 bits of strumming on the record in the entire record. And he's just discovered this whole thing, and he's just reinvestigating the instrument every day. It's crazy it sounds, I always say he's kind of like Eddie Van Halen, in which he's discovering what the instrument can do. He's still trying to dig in and going, what can I pull out of this? Because it's like a mystery for it. And there's an orchestra in there, and he's still working, and he's still creating these new things. And like I said, this is like a new language for him, and that's what's happened. And that's the way it's kind of been since we've been working, is this guitar style. And I think it's amazing. It's also amazing he can figure out a way to sing with it, because it moves so much.
When I first heard the record, the very first time I heard it down in one sitting, I was convinced that the vocal and acoustic had been recorded at the same time. And I think that is the highest compliment I can give you both.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, one thing you got to remember is Paul's got amazing time. He knows how to sing, and he knows how his rhythms go, and he really worked. I can't stress that enough. One thing that was so impressive about him that I go, anybody can learn this trick that you can learn from Paul Simon, which is, number 1, work your hardest. And as soon as you feel like you've worked as hard as you can, work even harder. And that's what he does. He's got discipline to kind of go. He really worked at getting those vocals right in the pocket. And if it wasn't, we'd go back and fix it, and we'd work on it. If you've done it before, you've probably mixed a record, and as you're mixing, there's a mic ready to go. We need to pop in a vocal. We pop it in to make it work. And it's amazing. He's really, really, I mean, I don't want to sound like the fanboy that I actually am, but he is amazing. He's fantastic.
Well, I suppose the inevitable question is, where do you go from there? What are you working on now? What are you doing?
Right now, there's always something to do with Paul. He never wastes time and messes around. He's always kind of thinking up something. So we'll see what he's up to next. And then I'm doing, right now, I'm writing a record with Edie. I think we're going to put out some vinyl this year. Just something wonderful. Her and I, over COVID, Edie had done this thing with the Bohemians where she said, I'll put a thing out on Instagram, says, write to me and tell me what you're doing, and I'll put it into a song. And so we would all do stuff on our own and send it to her, and she put it out. And so I don't know if we call it postcard music or what, just these little things. And so we kind of just continue doing that. And so I would write just some music here at my place and then send it off to her, and she'd send back, in a couple hours, she'd send a whole song on top of it. So we thought, well, let's just do this and put a record out. So we're having fun doing that.
Beautiful. And Wimberley is not too far from you, presumably.
No. It's Wimberley's in the Hill Country. So, for anybody who doesn't know, it's between Austin and San Antonio.
So is Studios at Fisher, is that the cabin, name of the cabin, or?
No, that was, we went there when the cabin was, we had some construction done. We actually made the room bigger. We had to get the control room bigger because it was just, I was just having to scoot by him in the chair. It was kind of tight. So we went there for a couple days just to track some acoustic guitar. Like the whole record was tracked at the Village, at the cabin, 2 days at Fisher, a bunch of days at Arlen, Power Station, some recording at Suma in Plainsville, Ohio. That's where Jamie did some of his stuff. And then mixed and some tracking done at the Reservoir with Pat. Everyone says Wynton Marsalis is on the record. Wynton's not. I don't know how that happened, but I see it online too. I guess he showed up one day to hang out because he and Paul are friends, and I think that got the thing that he's on the record.
Oh, I hadn't actually read that, so that escaped my confusion. So that's good.
And there's a documentary that should be out.
I was going to ask you, that was really one of the last things I was going to ask. Are you involved in Alex Gibney's documentary?
No, it was just, they shot that over a period of, really, I think 2 years. I think when I was on the record, that's when they started the documentary.
Was it continuous, or they were coming in and...
Yeah, so it's going to be, to my knowledge, I haven't seen it yet. It's his life, but as it tells the story, while it's telling that story, we're following him as he makes 7 Psalms. So you'll see us in New York doing all the stuff for Forgiveness and in Arlen and then at the cabin. I don't know where else they came, but
it's more concentrating on him as the artist creating the record, not the record creation process.
Yeah. And so, it'll be a 2-part series on everything, which I think is, I believe it's out in March. I'm not 100% sure. I've never, he's seen a little bit of it. I've seen just a smidge. But Alex, some of the footage they found is shockingly amazing of old footage and stuff. So it's pretty incredible. There's some amazing Graceland stuff.
Oh, I'm excited to see it.
One day, actually, I'll bring this up because then you might find it interesting. We were in New York and they needed to shoot some stuff where they took multi-tracks and went over them. So I got 2 songs from Graceland and I put them up and go through them, which is amazing. And I got to say this. When you bring up the sounds that Roy Halley got, he's a genius. You go, there it is. Everything sounded amazing and no bleed. It was the most minimal bleed. I was like, how did he do that? The guy is a genius and he's amazing. And he's a huge part of Paul's career, but that was really interesting going through those tracks and hearing that stuff.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall with that one.
I was loving it. And hearing would bring up things and go, oh, there's the Everly Brothers singing on this track. Oh, there's this. Wow. That's Adrian Belew playing a weird synthy guitar.
That period, wasn't it? Everything was just a wonder and anything was possible. And now anything is possible and it doesn't feel as exciting.
I can't imagine what it must have been like going to Africa and experiencing the people and bringing these bands together. And when you see it, the players would come in, but they bring their entire family. So the entire family would be sitting on the floor in the control room, no headphones, and everybody's jamming and playing music, and it looks incredible. And also, it's just amazing that he got to do that, and then the songs he wrote around that music is phenomenal. As we know, it is what it is.
I always say, we all love the '60s for obvious reasons, particularly mid-late '60s. But I still have a massive love for like very late '70s through mid '80s. To me, that's like the pinnacle because we had all the technology came together. You had beautiful, fancy SSL consoles that could automate and, do all kinds of stuff, and you could but you still had tape machines, and musicianship was prized, and also, of course, songwriting. We were still close enough to the Beatles that everybody wanted to write an amazing song.
Yeah.
And it was just a culmination.
I know, if you just look at if you look at Paul's late 70s band and the songs he wrote, the producers, I mean, he's got everybody. So it's Brecker, like you pointed out, Brecker Brothers, Steve Gadd, Richard T.
Oh, Tony Levin, of course.
Tony Levin, yeah.
Tony played on
Pony
all
band.
all the mid-70s on.
And then and then there was also the guys from Muscle Shoals on Still Crazy.
Yeah.
It's just like pretty amazing. And then at the same time, he's doing Saturday Night Live. So that's blowing up. It's like, so he's having, I think I said to him once, I was like, you must have had a great time. It must have been pretty fun. So, so when we did this record, Paul was really talking about a lot of elements coming to play. And one of his things is Harry Partch and the instruments of Harry Partch that Harry created for his music. And I had never heard of any of this. That was not a world that I had known of New York avant-garde and all that stuff. And Paul kind of introduced me to that stuff, kind of not like homework, but gave me a little bit of homework. So I went and did that. And what we used a lot on this record are these sounds that Paul had recorded of the Harry Partch instruments. And if you're not familiar with them, pretty crazy and microtonal. So they're pretty interesting. And one of them was the cloud bells, which are actually about this big. And just imagine like a wine jug cut in half and hung up both like the top and bottom. So we use those a lot. Those are like the first things you hear on the record are the cloud bowls. And those are used throughout. And the way we would use them is he would kind of listen for sounds. We had a big recording of them, and we'd go through and start pulling them around and put them in places. And sometimes they'd be the extension of the note. Sometimes they would just be something that was bubbling underneath there. And it's an incredible instrument. And the other thing we used a lot for low end on the record is the Harry Partch Chromelodeon, which I believe it's a modified pump organ. And what Harry did was he took the octave instead of X amount of notes, because I can't remember how many notes are in an octave right now, he made them 43. So the best way to describe it is if you were going to play Heart and Soul on this instrument, it would sound like a horror movie. Like the worst sound you can possibly imagine. But what it had on it were these bass notes. And that's what we used a lot. So all the low end, for the most part, is this big pump organ with these great bass notes on it. So we would use that a lot. Those are like the big of the Harry Partch instruments that are on that record.
I suppose I would naively call it microtonal, because he's splitting an octave into 43 unequal tones. That's what I read.
Yeah. And when you hear the intro of the record, you're going to hear two things. Well, you're going to hear a bunch of things, but one of is you're going to hear the bells, the cloud bowls, and then you'll hear something that kind of goes, it's like a faded sound that kind of goes, it leads right into the downbeat of the guitar. I always called it the dragon sound, but it's actually just a pump organ, but it's got this really crazy, I don't know if I put a Sans amp on it or something. There's one for you, Chad Blake.
I think Chad will put a Sans amp on anything.
Yeah, but yeah, that's a lot. Like you hear the Chromelodeon throughout the record. Anytime we hear bottom end, which is not much, that's where it's usually that, or this crazy Farrington baritone guitar he has, which is actually slightly high-strung baritone. Not all the way high-strung, so it's normal, high, normal. Yeah, so you can do these great chords and get these colors, but you still get all the body in the low end. So I believe the last chord of the Lord is a combination of Gurion and Farrington baritone.
Earlier you were talking about his exploration, to paraphrase, of guitar playing, his continued interest in wanting to explore the instrument. The thing that was just running through my mind was the fact that you're saying he's been using that same guitar since 70 or 71, so 52, possibly 53 years. And that sort of makes sense, doesn't it? It's like he's not looking for a new tool. He's looking to understand the tool he already has.
Yeah, he's constantly... With that guitar, it's still investigation. It's still like mining what can it do? What can you do with it? Now, in the other world of sounds, he wants to hear some new sounds. If he can find a new sound that's incredible, he wants to know. And so if you've got an idea, or you go, hey, check this out, he's going to give a listen, and because it's constantly looking. And if we find sonic information, like just a little bit, if it's just a little piece, that's a pretty good day. If you find one piece of really cool, either part or piece of information that comes to you like that, it's a good day in that world. And that's where the Harry Parch stuff is, still investigating that stuff. We're still trying out new things. What happens if we do this? What happens with this symbol? He's constantly digging. And the one thing I will tell you, labeled a folk singer, but he's so far beyond that. And I didn't know how adventurous of a composer he is, an arranger and record maker.
Folk singer part's such a minimal amount of his career, isn't it?
Exactly. It's easy to describe him like that, but he's much more exploratory sonically. I mean, if you just listen to any of the records, like anything, if you take Stranger to Stranger, mm-hmm. I mean, that record it's a work of art as far as I'm concerned. It's so good. It scares me. I don't know how they did it. That's how good it is. Especially like the song Proof of Love. If you listen to that, how many people do you know at that age that are still pushing boundaries sonically, musically, lyrically, once you're going to get into Seven Psalms? He did the same way, but the idea of it still being an acoustic record. This is actually something that was said a lot. If we ever did any sounds that pulled our ear too much away from the acoustic guitar, we didn't do it. We always had to remember it's a guitar record.
Well, Marvus, thank you ever so much for hanging here and sharing so much. And now I want to find an excuse to come out to Austin and see you.
Well, there's a couple things. There's barbecue.
Barbecue, yes.
Yeah, Paul Simon. If he's around, you never know. Yeah.
I'm definitely incredibly excited about that possibility, yes. Yeah, barbecue, and of course you and your studio. Yeah,
there's you know what, I got to tell you, there's a lot of great studios in town, and there's new ones coming up. It seems like every month I'm hearing of, somebody's got this great spot with killer gear or, this and that. So there's a lot to go around here. So a lot of great producers too, great engineers.
Marvus. Well, thank you ever so much, Carl. I really, really appreciate it. Of course, everybody, there will be a link down below where you can stream the album. We'll have links to everything we possibly can. So click down below, and also I'll pin it in the comments above. Mm-hmm. So once again, thank you, Carl, for your generosity and sharing everything. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
We shall.
Thanks, everyone. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, ciao, goodbye.